I was standing in my kitchen in Denver, hands deep in a bowl of honey glaze, when my phone buzzed on the counter. The smell of cinnamon, ham, and fresh pine filled the house. It was Christmas morning, my favorite day of the year. For 43 years, I'd hosted Christmas dinner in this same kitchen. Every wall held a memory. Every dish on the stove had a story. I smiled as I wiped my hands on a towel and reached for my phone, expecting a Merry Christmas from my son, Eddie. Instead, I saw a message that made my heart drop. Eddie, hey mom, change of plans. Cynthia wants to host dinner at our place this year. Just bring dessert. Just bring dessert. I read it twice. Then again. The words didn't make sense. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a joke. But there was nothing playful about the way it was written. No smiley face, no call, no explanation. Just a short text sent to the family group chat. Me, Eddie, his wife Cynthia, and their 2 kids. After 43 years of hosting Christmas dinner, suddenly I was being told to just bring dessert. My hands went cold. The glaze brush slipped into the sink. I stood there staring at the phone, waiting for another message, something like, just kidding, Mom, or, of course we're coming to your house. But nothing came. I walked over to the window. Snow was falling softly over the yard, coating the garden bench my late husband, David, built the year we married. Every year since he passed, I kept this tradition alive. The big Christmas dinner, the laughter, the candles, the ham he used to carve with such pride. Eddie had grown up in this house. He'd helped hang the lights when he was a teenager. He and Cynthia even got engaged here. And now, all of a sudden, my home, our home, wasn't where Christmas belonged anymore. I texted back, "Oh, is everything okay?" His reply came quick, "Yeah, all good." Cynthia thought it'd be easier for the kids. Less driving around. "We'll see you at 5. No apology. No invitation to help. No mention of the 43 years of tradition. I stood in the quiet kitchen for a long time, listening to the clock tick above the stove. My heart told me to cancel everything, to wrap up the ham, put away the table settings, and spend the night alone. But another part of me refused to let one text erase decades of love and effort. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Cynthia just wanted to help. Maybe I was being sensitive. That's what we mothers do, isn't it? We always give the benefit of the doubt, even when our hearts already know the truth. I went back to the ham, brushing on the glaze slowly, my hands steadying even though my chest still ached. By noon, the pie was cooling on the counter, and the house was spotless, like it always was. I sat at the dining table and looked around. The garland I'd made from pine cones last week, the red candles flickering on the mantel, the stockings with the kids' names embroidered by hand. It all felt unnecessary now, like I was preparing for guests who wouldn't come. The phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Cynthia. "Hey Brittany, just checking if you're still bringing dessert. We have everything else covered. Excited to see you later." Everything else covered. That one hurt worse than the first text. I typed back, "Of course, I'll bring the pie." Then deleted it. Then typed again, "Yes, see you soon." I placed the phone face down on the counter. I thought about David, how he'd sit at the head of the table, wearing that old red sweater I could never throw away. He used to say Christmas wasn't about gifts or decorations. It was about gathering under one roof year after year, no matter how far life had taken us. And now that roof no longer mattered. At 3 o'clock, I dressed in a simple green sweater and black slacks. Nothing fancy. I wrapped the pie carefully in foil, slid it into a carrier, and grabbed my coat. The house looked beautiful, but empty. I whispered a quiet, "Merry Christmas, David," before locking the door. The drive to Boulder was peaceful, but heavy. Snow kept falling, the highway clear and quiet. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, with every mile. When I reached Eddie's neighborhood, I couldn't help but notice how new everything looked. The trimmed lawns, the glowing smart lights, the tall modern homes with wide glass windows. His house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, big and perfect, the kind you see in holiday commercials. There were already 2 cars in the driveway, both from Cynthia's family. Not a single one from ours. I parked on the street, took a deep breath, and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was neat, my lipstick light pink, my smile forced. I stepped out of the car, balancing the dessert carrier in my arms, and walked toward the door. Through the big windows, I could see people moving around, bright clothes, glasses clinking, laughter. But none of it sounded like home. Cynthia opened the door with a big, showy grin. "Brittany, you made it. Oh, the pie looks great. Just set it on the counter. We've got a few other desserts, too." A few other desserts. I smiled politely, my voice soft. "Of course. Merry Christmas." She hugged me briefly, more like a gesture than warmth, then turned back to the kitchen, where caterers were setting trays on marble counters. I stood there for a moment, unsure where to put my coat, my purse, or myself. I could hear voices from the living room, her relatives laughing, the TV playing some talk show. Not a single Christmas carol. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, the smell of rosemary and citrus filling the air, not the cinnamon and ham that had always meant Christmas in our family. For the first time in 43 years, I was a guest at my own family's Christmas dinner. And deep down, I had a feeling that before the night was over, something inside me would change forever. When I stepped inside Eddie's house, the warmth hit me first, not the kind of warmth that came from love or laughter, but from a thermostat set too high. Everything smelled of sage, citrus, and something store-bought. The kind of scent that comes from a candle you light to make a place feel inviting when it isn't. The entryway looked like a magazine spread. White walls, glass railing on the staircase, not a speck of clutter anywhere. I wiped my boots carefully on the mat, even though it was spotless. My home was lived in, full of mismatched furniture, framed pictures, and the faint smell of cinnamon. This house looked perfect, but I couldn't imagine anyone curling up on that white sofa with a blanket. 2 catering vans were still outside, and through the kitchen archway, I could see strangers moving around in black aprons. I clutched my pie a little tighter. Cynthia turned from the island, wearing a sparkling green dress and a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom, you made it. Come in. Isn't the house festive?" I looked around. Festive wasn't the word I'd use. There was a tall, elegant Christmas tree in the corner, silver ornaments, white ribbon, no sign of anything handmade. No family ornaments, no paper stars from the kids, no popcorn garland. "It's beautiful," I said quietly, because that's what polite mothers say. She reached for the pie, placing it on the far end of the counter next to a row of desserts that looked like they came from a bakery. "You didn't have to bring anything. We've got plenty." "Oh, I wanted to," I replied. "It's tradition." Cynthia smiled again. "We're trying something different this year." The way she said it, cheerful but firm, told me that different really meant new rules. I nodded and stepped aside to hang up my coat. There was no coat rack, only a narrow closet with guest slippers lined up perfectly. I slid mine beside them and noticed 2 wine glasses sitting half empty on the counter. Her family must have arrived early. In the living room, the noise of conversation filled the air, unfamiliar voices laughing too loud, a baby crying, a man telling a long story about a ski trip. I didn't recognize half the people there. Cynthia's parents, her brother, her cousin, they all seemed at home, while I felt like a stranger. Eddie came around the corner, holding a tray of appetizers. "Hey, Mom," he said quickly, kissing my cheek without looking me in the eyes. "Glad you made it. Isn't the place looking great?" "It's beautiful," I repeated, trying to sound cheerful. He was wearing a new sweater I hadn't seen before. Not one of the ones I used to knit him. He seemed distracted, glancing toward the dining table set with name cards and tall candles. "Everything's perfect," I said softly. He smiled, relieved I wasn't making things awkward. "Dinner's almost ready. Make yourself comfortable." I wanted to tell him I already was comfortable. At home, in the kitchen I'd cooked in since he was 5. But instead, I smiled and nodded. Cynthia's mother came over with a glass of white wine and an air of authority. "You must be Brittany," she said, offering a quick handshake. "Cynthia's told us so much about you." "Oh," I said. "All good things, I hope." She laughed politely but didn't answer. "You have a lovely son. They've really made a wonderful home together." I looked around the perfectly curated space. Yes, they had. But I wasn't sure where I fit in that picture. The caterers moved around quietly, placing dishes on the counter. Turkey breast, roasted vegetables, an expensive-looking salad. It all looked delicious, but cold, somehow, not the kind of food you sneak tastes of before dinner. I stood there feeling out of place, holding my purse, wondering where to sit. Nobody offered me a chair or asked about my morning. Cynthia's brother was showing pictures of his new boat, and her father was bragging about his golf game. I tried to start a conversation with one of the kids, my granddaughter, Maya. She was curled up on the couch with a tablet, watching a movie. "Maya, what are you watching, sweetheart?" "Something on Netflix," she mumbled without looking up. I smiled and sat beside her for a moment, but she kept her eyes glued to the screen. Kids are different these days, I thought. Not bad, just different. From the kitchen, Cynthia called out, "Mom, can you grab the napkins from that drawer by the fridge?" Her tone was cheerful, but it sounded like a hostess giving directions to a guest, not a daughter asking her mother for help. I found the napkins and started folding them, something to keep my hands busy. When the meal was ready, everyone gathered around the long dining table. I noticed my place card was near the end, between Cynthia's cousin and her aunt. Eddie sat across the table, laughing at something his father-in-law said. I stared at the food, the candles, the unfamiliar faces. The dinner looked perfect, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong there. Halfway through the meal, I reached for the salt, and Cynthia's cousin quickly handed it to me with a polite smile, like I was someone's neighbor, not family. When dessert time came, Cynthia gestured toward the bakery cakes. "We've got tiramisu, pecan pie, and some lemon tarts," she said brightly. Then she glanced at my homemade pie sitting at the end of the counter, untouched. "Oh, and Brittany brought something too." Her voice was kind but distant, the kind people use when they're announcing a raffle prize no one asked for. Everyone chose the bakery desserts. No one even lifted the foil off mine. I sat back and watched as they laughed, took photos, and toasted to new traditions. My heart felt heavy, but I kept a polite smile on my face. When the plates were cleared, Cynthia started talking about how next year they might rent a cabin for Christmas, maybe in Breckenridge, maybe California. She said it casually, but I knew what it meant. My house, my table, my cooking, they were part of the past now. I looked across the table at Eddie. He was laughing, comfortable, completely unaware of the ache in my chest. And that's when something inside me shifted. I didn't know it yet. But that was the night I began to realize that keeping quiet doesn't always protect peace. Sometimes it only protects other people's comfort. The laughter around me faded, and I made myself a silent promise. I wasn't going to sit quietly much longer, because this wasn't just any dinner. It was the first sign that my own family no longer saw me as the heart of it. And by the time the next course was served, I already knew something was going to change before this night was over. Dinner was served at exactly 6 o'clock, like clockwork. The caterers cleared the kitchen and left quietly, and for a moment I thought maybe things were turning around. Maybe we could still have a nice evening. The table looked like something from a magazine. Polished silverware, tall white candles, and little place cards with gold trim. But the air didn't feel like Christmas. There was no warmth, no laughter, no music playing softly in the background like we always had at my house. Just polite chatter and the sound of forks on plates. Cynthia clinked her glass with a spoon. Okay, everyone, dinner is ready. Let's dig in before it gets cold. Eddie stood beside her, smiling, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they're performing. I sat at the far end of the table, between Cynthia's cousin who was on his phone and her aunt who was already telling a long story about her new kitchen remodel. The first few minutes were quiet except for the scraping of cutlery. Then the conversation started. Work promotions, ski trips, new tech gadgets, house prices in Boulder. Everyone had something to brag about. I tried to join in once. The snow's been pretty this week. I said gently, reminds me of the winter Eddie built that snow fort in our yard. No one answered. Cynthia's aunt just smiled politely and went back to her story about granite countertops. Not a single person asked how I'd been or how I was spending my days. It was as if I'd disappeared. When the food came around, Cynthia's brother poured cider into glasses. My grandson, Noah, reached across the table too quickly and knocked one over. The amber liquid splashed onto my blouse. Oh no, I said softly, dabbing at it with my napkin. Before I could say more, Cynthia snapped, Noah, careful. You're always so clumsy. He looked down, ashamed. I'm sorry, Grandma. It's all right, sweetheart, I said, smiling at him. It's just a shirt. Cynthia sighed. Mom, maybe you should move your glass over here, so he doesn't spill again. I nodded quietly. It was easier than arguing. The food was good, perfectly seasoned, perfectly plated, but it had no heart. Every bite felt heavy. I missed the smell of my kitchen, the sound of David carving the ham, the way Eddie used to sneak bites when he thought I wasn't looking. Halfway through dinner, I decided to speak up. Before we all eat, I said gently, maybe we could say grace? Cynthia looked up from her plate, fork halfway to her mouth. Oh, Mom, that's sweet, but let's keep it casual this year. Just like that. Let's keep it casual this year. The words hit harder than I expected. I had said that same grace every Christmas since 1980, the year Eddie was born. It wasn't fancy, just a few lines about gratitude, family, and love. It was our tradition. David used to squeeze my hand while I said it. Even when he got sick, he never missed it. I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled. Of course, I said, casual is fine. The conversations picked back up, louder this time. Cynthia's brother and Eddie started debating real estate. It began as friendly banter, but quickly turned sharp. You bought too soon, the brother said. Interest rates were bound to drop. Eddie shot back. Well, at least I'm not still renting at 45. Cynthia's father tried to laugh it off, but it was clear the tension was growing. I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting the turkey into small pieces I couldn't finish. I felt invisible, sitting right there, yet completely unseen. The noise grew. The aunt beside me poured another glass of wine and started talking about politics. Cynthia's mother tried to hush her, but she only got louder. Someone turned on the TV in the next room for the kids, and Christmas carols mixed with arguing voices. The perfect dinner was falling apart, one polite smile at a time. I looked around that shiny table and saw it clearly for the first time. This wasn't family. These were people acting out a version of it. Everyone was performing, trying to prove something. And in the middle of it all, the one thing missing was what used to make Christmas special, love that didn't need to impress anyone. When Cynthia got up to bring the roast from the oven, the smell of burnt edges filled the room. She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand. Guess I left it in too long. The laughter that followed was strained, awkward. I offered to help carve, but she waved me off. No, sit down, Mom. You've done enough for a lifetime. That should have sounded kind, but the way she said it made me feel like an old chair someone had moved to the corner. I sat still, watching her scrape the burnt edges onto a tray. Eddie tried to help, but she snapped at him too. The tension spread through the room like smoke. I thought about leaving, just picking up my coat, thanking everyone, and driving home. But something inside told me to stay. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was that quiet voice that said, "You need to see this through." The noise grew worse. Cynthia's father was on his third glass of wine, arguing with her brother about money. The kids were running around, chasing the dog. Eddie tried to settle them, but his voice was drowned out. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, watching everything unravel. It was almost painful to see. When Cynthia slammed the carving knife down and said, "Can we please have one peaceful dinner?" the whole table went silent. For a moment, all you could hear was the sound of the candles flickering. I looked at my son. His jaw was tight, his eyes tired. This was supposed to be his big night, the Christmas where he and his wife showed they could take over the tradition. But all I could see was the weight of pretending to be perfect. He caught my eye for just a second. There was something in his expression, guilt, maybe, or maybe he finally realized how far we'd drifted. The silence stretched too long, so I did what mothers do. I smiled and tried to soften it. "Well," I said gently, "at least the pie won't burn. It's the one thing that's still sweet tonight." A few people chuckled out of politeness, but no one really laughed. That's when I knew Christmas was ruined, not because of burnt food or arguments, but because the spirit of it was gone, the kind of warmth you can't fake. And as I sat there, holding my napkin in my lap, one thought echoed in my mind. These people are my family, but tonight they feel like strangers. I didn't know it yet, but that night's chaos would lead to something much bigger. Because sometimes when everything falls apart, that's when the truth finally shows itself. And before that evening ended, I was going to speak a truth that would change everything in this family forever. The room was still tense after Cynthia's outburst. No one seemed to know what to say. Eddie tried to start a new conversation, but his voice sounded forced. The candles were burning low, and the once elegant table now looked tired. Crumbs, wine stains, half-eaten food. I sat there quietly, watching everyone pretend nothing had happened. I'd spent the whole evening swallowing my feelings, but the lump in my throat wasn't going away this time. I thought about all the years I had given to this family. Every dinner, every birthday, every late-night phone call when Eddie needed advice. I had poured everything I had into keeping us together. And now I realized I was the only one still trying. Cynthia stood up to fetch dessert. "Okay, everyone, who wants tiramisu?" she said cheerfully, her voice just a little too bright. That was the moment I decided. Enough pretending. Enough waiting for someone else to notice how far we had drifted. I picked up my glass of water and tapped it gently with my fork. The sound was soft, but it carried through the room. Everyone turned toward me. "Before dessert," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I have a small announcement to make." The chatter stopped. Even the kids looked up. Eddie frowned slightly. "Mom, what's going on?" I stood up slowly, pressing my hands against the back of my chair. My heart was pounding, but I didn't want anger to lead me. I wanted clarity. "I know tonight hasn't gone as planned." I began. "And I know things change as families grow. But I realized something tonight, something I should have faced a long time ago." Cynthia froze beside the counter. The only sound was the quiet hum of the dishwasher. I looked around the table, at faces that felt both familiar and foreign. For 43 years, I've hosted Christmas dinner in my home in Denver. It was where David and I raised Eddie, where we built every memory that mattered to us. It was never about the food or the decorations. It was about being together under one roof. My throat tightened, but I didn't stop. Tonight, I finally understood that roof doesn't mean much anymore. You've all made your own homes, your own traditions, and that's fine. But it also means it's time for me to let go. Eddie's brow furrowed. Let go of what? I've decided to sell the house, I said. I already spoke with a realtor last week. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to touch. Cynthia's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Eddie stared at me like he hadn't heard right. What? He said finally. You're selling the house? Mom, that house is ours someday. I met his eyes. No, Eddie, it was ours. But you've all already moved on. I just didn't realize I was the only one still living in the past. His face went pale. But, Mom, that's where all the family stuff is. Dad's workshop, your garden, all the Christmas decorations. Memories don't live in walls and furniture, I said gently. They live in us. And I think it's time I make room for new ones. Cynthia crossed her arms, trying to sound calm. Brittany, maybe we should talk about this later. Tonight's not the time. Actually, I said, my voice steady, tonight is exactly the time. Because this is where I realized it. I've been holding on to a house full of memories waiting for all of you to come back and fill it again. But that's not how life works. You have your own home now, your own family, and that's how it should be. Eddie shook his head, still trying to process it. You can't just sell it. That's our childhood home. It's mine to sell, I said, not unkindly. And I need to do it while I still have the courage. The room stayed quiet. I could feel Cynthia's family watching me, uncomfortable but curious. I took a deep breath and smiled, even though my eyes were wet. I'm not angry, I said softly. I just finally understand that it's time to stop waiting for people to show up in the way they used to. It's time for me to build something new for myself. Eddie leaned forward, his voice breaking a little. So, you're really going to do this? You're going to sell the house. And what? Move somewhere else. Yes, I said. Maybe a smaller place. Maybe by the mountains. Somewhere peaceful. Somewhere I can start fresh. Cynthia looked nervous. But where will we go for holidays now? I smiled faintly. Wherever you want. You've been doing fine without me. Eddie dropped his fork, the sound sharp in the silence. That's not fair, Mom. I'm not trying to be fair, I replied quietly. I'm trying to be honest. The weight of those words hung in the air. I looked at my grandchildren, sitting quietly at the end of the table. Maya's eyes were wide. Noah looked confused. I softened my tone. Don't worry, sweetheart, I said to him. Grandma's just making some changes. You'll still visit me. I'll just have a new house to show you. I turned back to the adults. I wanted to thank everyone for tonight, I said. It reminded me of what really matters and what doesn't. Eddie tried again. Mom, can we talk about this? I picked up my purse and my pie from the counter. There's nothing more to talk about tonight. You all have your plans. I have mine. As I walked toward the door, I could feel every pair of eyes following me. Cynthia started to say something, but Eddie stopped her with a small shake of his head. At the doorway, I turned around. Eddie, I said softly, I love you, and I'm proud of the life you've built, but I need to build mine too. Then I stepped outside. The cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. Snowflakes floated through the light from their windows, landing softly on my coat. I carried the pie carefully to my car, set it on the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Inside the house, laughter had died completely. Through the window, I saw them standing around the table, silent, unsure what to say. I took one last look at the house glowing behind me and whispered to myself, it's time. As I drove back to Denver, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, Not anger, not sadness, but relief. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to save Christmas for me. I had just saved it for myself. When I pulled into my driveway that night, the street was quiet. The snow had stopped falling, and the house looked peaceful under the soft glow of the porch light. It felt like the first deep breath I'd taken all evening. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon and pine still lingered from earlier that morning. Everything was just as I'd left it, the candles half burned, the table still set for guests who never came. I set the pie down on the counter, peeled back the foil, and cut myself a small slice. It was still warm, soft in the center. I took one bite and smiled, faintly. It tasted like home, the kind of home that no one could take away. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry or bitter. Just done. The kind of done that comes with clarity. I made a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and let the silence fill the room. That night, I slept better than I expected. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window. I made coffee and looked around, seeing my house differently now. The decision I had made wasn't about loss. It was about freedom. By the third day, the phone calls started. Eddie first. I saw his name flash on the screen and took a deep breath before answering. "Hi, honey." "Mom, what was that about?" His voice was sharp. "You can't just make that kind of announcement in front of everyone." I said gently. It was the right time. He sighed loudly. "You embarrassed us, Mom." Cynthia's family didn't know what to say. "You dropped a bomb on Christmas." "I didn't mean to embarrass anyone," I said calmly. "I just needed to speak my truth." "You can't sell the house," he said firmly. "That's our childhood home. You can't just get rid of it." I took a sip of coffee and looked out the window at the snow melting on the fence. "I'm not getting rid of it, Eddie. I'm letting it go. There's a difference." "What are you even going to do?" he asked. "Where will you live? What about all your things?" "I'm figuring that out," I said, "but I'm fine. I'm just making room for the next chapter." He didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing heavily through the phone. "Cynthia thinks you're acting out of emotion," he said finally. "I'm acting out of understanding." I replied, "There's a difference between being emotional and being clear." He went quiet, then, with a frustrated tone, said, "I need to go. We'll talk later." When the call ended, I felt the sting of his words, not because he was angry, but because I knew he didn't understand yet. He would eventually, but not today. Later that week, I started cleaning. I opened closets, drawers, and boxes I hadn't touched in years. Every photo, every trinket brought back memories of David. His laugh, his steady hands fixing things, the way he'd hum when he read the newspaper. In the middle of sorting, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, my neighbor, Paul Ramirez, stood there holding a box of light bulbs. "Hey, Brittany," he said, "your porch light's out. Thought I'd bring you one." Paul was a retired architect who lived 2 houses down. His wife had passed away 6 years ago, and he spent most of his days tending to his garden or tinkering in his garage. "Thank you," I said, smiling. I didn't even notice. He looked past me into the living room, where boxes were stacked along the wall. "You moving?" "Not yet," I said, "but soon." "Big decision," he said. "Need a hand with anything?" Normally, I would have said no, but something about the calm way he asked made me nod. "Actually, yes, if you don't mind carrying a few boxes to the garage." He smiled. "Sure thing." As we worked, he asked why I was selling. I told him the truth about Christmas, about the dinner, about how I'd finally decided to let go. He nodded, thinking for a moment. "You know," he said, "I used to think my house felt empty after Maria passed. But I realized it wasn't the walls that made it empty. It was what I stopped bringing to it. Maybe Christmas was never about where you hosted it, but what you carried inside you. I looked at him, surprised by how simple and true that sounded. That's beautiful, I said quietly. He shrugged. I've had a few years to figure it out. We worked in silence for a while. When we finished, he stood by the doorway and said, "If you need anything, just knock. You don't have to do all this alone." After he left, I sat on the couch surrounded by boxes and thought about what he'd said. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd been holding on to the house because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't have it, afraid of what I'd lose, not realizing what I might gain. That evening, I called the realtor again to confirm an appointment. Her name was Denise, a kind woman from Boulder, who had helped a few people in the neighborhood downsize. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. It was still the same house, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like it was waiting, not for someone else, but for me to finish my part of the story here. The next few days were quiet. Eddie didn't call again, though I saw his name pop up on my phone once before he hung up. I knew he was wrestling with guilt and pride. Cynthia texted once, "We should talk when things settle." I replied, "I'm always open to talking." I didn't add more. Sometimes silence speaks louder than explanations. By the weekend, Paul came over again, this time with 2 cups of coffee. "You look like someone who could use a break," he said, handing me one. We sat on the back porch, watching the last bits of snow melt from the garden. He told me about his late wife's love for roses, and I told him about David's passion for woodworking. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something quieter, a kind of understanding that comes from 2 people who have lived long enough to know that companionship doesn't always mean love. Sometimes it just means being seen. When he left, I felt lighter. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. I didn't write about sadness or loss. I wrote about possibility. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I didn't feel like a woman who'd lost her family. I felt like a woman who had finally found her footing again. The following week came quickly. The air had turned crisp again, and most of the snow in my yard had melted into little patches of frost. Denise, the realtor, arrived right on time, a folder tucked under her arm and a friendly smile that didn't feel rehearsed. "Your house is lovely, Brittany," she said as we walked through the living room. "You've taken great care of it. It's going to photograph beautifully." I nodded, glancing around at the space that had held a lifetime of noise and memories. "It's time," I said simply. We sat at the kitchen table while she went over details, listing price, open house dates, what to fix before photos. It all sounded so official, so final. When she left, I looked down at the pen I'd just used to sign the papers. My hand didn't shake. It was steady, certain. After she drove away, I went up to the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. Dust clung to the boxes, and the old pull chain light flickered weakly. Most of the boxes were labeled by season: Christmas, school years, David's tools, photos. I opened one marked personal. Inside were old letters, cards, and a few of David's notebooks. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the smell of cardboard and cedar, and began reading. Some of the pages were filled with his handwriting, neat, precise. He always wrote with purpose, even in small notes. Then I found an envelope addressed to me. The handwriting was his. The date in the corner said 1998. My breath caught. That was the year we took our first trip to the mountains together, long before Eddie got married. I unfolded the letter carefully. "Britt, if you're reading this years from now, promise me one thing. Don't wait too long to live. You've always taken care of everyone else. Me, Eddie, your mother. One day, you'll wake up and realize you've spent your life holding up everyone else's dreams. When that day comes, go live one of your own. Don't let time decide for you. Love, David." I sat there for a long time holding that letter. The attic was cold, but I didn't feel it. I thought about how often I'd told myself there would be time to travel, to rest, to breathe. And somehow the years had slipped by while I made sure everyone else was okay. That letter felt like permission, maybe even a nudge. I stood up, brushed off the dust from my jeans, and decided that once the house sold, I would go somewhere. Not just a day trip, a real trip. David and I had always talked about spending a New Year's in Aspen, watching the fireworks over the snow-covered mountains. We never went. Life had always been too busy or too expensive or not right now. I wasn't waiting anymore. That night, I pulled out my laptop and looked up small cabins near Aspen. One caught my eye, a simple place with a fireplace, big windows, and a view of the mountains. It was available for the week after Christmas. I booked it before I could second-guess myself. The next morning, I began packing boxes again, but this time with a lighter heart. Each drawer I emptied felt like releasing another piece of the past I'd been clinging to. In the hallway closet, I found Eddie's old baseball glove. The leather was cracked, the laces worn. I smiled, remembering the afternoons when David would pitch balls to him in the yard until the sun went down. I placed it in a box labeled family keepsakes. I would save a few things, but not everything. Some memories need space to breathe. By evening, I sat down to write a letter to Eddie. I didn't want to argue anymore. I just wanted him to understand. Eddie, I know my decision surprised you, and maybe it hurt. That wasn't my intention. I just realized that I can't keep living my life waiting to be invited into moments that should include me by love, not convenience. You can't keep inviting me only when it suits your plans. I need to be part of my own story again. The house will soon belong to someone new, but that doesn't erase what we built inside it. Those memories are safe with me. I hope one day you'll see this not as me walking away, but as me walking towards something I should have done a long time ago. Love, Mom. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in an envelope with his name on it. I'd drop it in the mail before leaving town. The next few days went by quickly. Denise scheduled the photographer, and I spent hours making the house spotless. Each time I took something down, the framed wedding photo, the shelf of travel mugs David collected, I whispered a quiet goodbye. Paul stopped by often, usually carrying coffee or a sandwich. He'd help me lift boxes, fix a loose cabinet door, or just talk. You look lighter, he said one afternoon. I feel lighter, I told him, like I finally stopped waiting for permission to live. He smiled. That's the thing about waiting. It doesn't stop time, it just steals it. The night before the photographer came, I walked through the house one last time. The rooms echoed, slightly without the furniture. I ran my hand along the hallway wall where we'd marked Eddie's height every birthday. The pencil lines were still there. I thought about painting over them, but couldn't bring myself to do it. Let the new family wonder who grew up here. Maybe they'd feel the love still sitting in these walls. The next morning, Denise texted to confirm the listing went live. You'll have offers fast, she wrote. I smiled and typed back. I'm ready. By noon, I had packed my suitcase. A few warm clothes, my journal, David's letter, and a photo of him and Eddie from years ago. I loaded everything into the car. Before leaving, I stood in the doorway and looked back at the empty living room. It didn't feel like I was losing something. It felt like I was making room for something new. I locked the door, placed the keys in an envelope for Denise, and drove off. The mountains grew larger in the distance, blue and white under the winter sky. Halfway to Aspen, I pulled over at a scenic overlook. The valley below was blanketed in snow. I took out David's letter, held it in both hands, and whispered, I'm doing it, love. I'm finally doing it. Then I got back in the car, turned on the radio, and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't heading home to anyone else. I was heading home to myself. The drive into Aspen was quiet and peaceful. The mountains looked almost unreal, their tops dusted with snow that glittered in the sunlight. I rolled down the window slightly and breathed in the cold, clean air. It smelled like pine and freedom. The cabin I rented sat near maroon bells tucked between tall evergreens. It wasn't big, just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a stone fireplace, but it was perfect. The first night, I lit a fire and sat on the couch with a cup of tea, listening to the wind whistle softly outside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to check my phone or make sure someone else was okay. There was no one needing dinner, no one expecting anything from me. It was just me, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight peeking through the curtains. I made oatmeal, poured a cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching a group of people ski down a nearby hill. They looked older, laughing and shouting as they tumbled through the snow. Later that afternoon, I met them in town. They were part of a group called Silver Horizons, locals and retirees who met every week for skiing, hiking, and coffee. When I introduced myself, a woman named Judy smiled warmly. "You're joining us next time," she said. "No excuses." I laughed. "I've never skied in my life." "Then you'll fit right in," she said. That following Wednesday, I found myself standing at the base of a small hill in borrowed gear. The snow crunched under my boots, and the air stung my cheeks. The instructor, a patient man with kind eyes, taught me how to glide, stop, and fall safely. The falling part one mastered right away. The first few tries were clumsy. I spent more time sitting in the snow than standing on my skis. But something about it felt freeing. I wasn't trying to be good at it. I was just letting myself try. When I finally made it down the small slope without falling, everyone cheered like I'd won a medal. Afterward, we gathered for coffee at a local cafe. The women talked about everything from grandkids to travel to old hobbies they'd rediscovered. They laughed loudly without worrying who might be listening. It felt easy, natural, a kind of joy I hadn't known I'd been missing. That night, I wrote in my journal. For the first time in years, I woke up without waiting for someone to need me. Maybe this is what peace feels like. The days in Aspen passed softly, but full. I hiked small trails behind the cabin, cooked simple meals, and spent hours painting the mountain view from my porch. It wasn't perfect art, but it made me happy. One afternoon, I drove into town for groceries and stopped by the post office. The clerk handed me a small stack of mail forwarded from Denver. Among the envelopes was one from the realtor. Inside was a short note and the final sale contract for the house. I stood there holding the papers, the reality hitting me. My house, the one where I'd spent nearly 5 decades, now belonged to someone else. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat on a bench outside, looked up at the mountains, and whispered, "Thank you." That house had given me a lifetime of memories, but it had also held me in a version of myself that no longer existed. Signing it away didn't feel like losing something. It felt like making space for who I was becoming. I signed the papers, mailed them back, and smiled. It was done. That evening, while watching the fire, I heard a soft knock on the cabin door. When I opened it, there was Paul, holding a grocery bag and wearing that same easy smile. "Brought your mail," he said, handing it over. "And a few things from the farmer's market." "Paul," I said, surprised, "you drove all the way from Denver?" He shrugged. "It's only a few hours. Besides, I wanted to see if you're settling in okay." I stepped aside, letting him in. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he said. "You've got quite a view here." We sat by the fireplace while I unpacked the bag, fresh bread, a jar of local honey, and a small bouquet of dried lavender. It smelled like home. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. You look good, Brittany. Happier. I think I am. I admitted. I signed the final sale papers today. He smiled gently. How does it feel? Like I finally stopped standing still? I said. For years I was waiting for life to go back to what it used to be. But it never does it? No, he said. It doesn't. But sometimes what comes after is better than what we were holding on to. We talked for hours about life, family, and the strange way time softens even the hardest memories. When he finally stood to leave, I walked him to the door. Don't be a stranger, I said. I won't, he replied. Enjoy your new beginning. After he left, I poured myself another cup of tea and stood by the window. The snow outside sparkled under the moonlight. I thought about all the things I used to fear, being alone, being forgotten, being left behind. And here I was, alone but not lonely, quiet but not empty. The next morning, I joined Silver Horizons again. This time I didn't fall as much. Judy clapped when I reached the bottom of the hill without stopping halfway. Look at you, she cheered. You're practically a pro now. I laughed, breathless and happy. Let's not go that far. As I looked around at the group, women my age who had lived through loss, change, and years of caring for everyone but themselves, I felt something click inside me. We weren't running from our pasts. We were simply walking into whatever time we had left with open hearts. That night, I opened my journal again and wrote, I think I'm finally learning that starting over doesn't mean forgetting who I was. It just means giving her room to breathe. Before bed, I checked my phone. A single message from Eddie. Hope you're okay, Mom. The kids miss you. I stared at it for a moment, smiled softly, and typed back, I'm okay. Honey, tell them Grandma loves them. Then I set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and fell asleep to the sound of the wind moving gently through the trees. For the first time in a very long while, I didn't dream about the past. I dreamed about what might come next. It was New Year's Eve, and Aspen was alive with quiet excitement. The town square sparkled with lights, and families strolled through the snow, holding cups of hot chocolate and laughter. I stayed in my cabin that night, sitting by the fire with a soft blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but I didn't feel the same ache I used to feel during holidays. I wasn't lonely, I was at peace. I had the radio playing softly, the kind of old country songs David loved, and I found myself humming along. I was halfway through writing in my journal when my phone rang. The screen lit up with Eddie's name. For a moment, I hesitated. I hadn't spoken to him since that sharp conversation after Christmas. But something told me to answer. Hi, honey, I said, keeping my voice calm. Mom, Eddie said, his tone uneven. I could hear noise behind him, dishes clattering, voices overlapping. Can you talk for a minute? Of course, I said. Is everything okay? There was a long pause. Then I heard it, Cynthia crying softly in the background. We hosted a New Year's dinner tonight. He said, finally. It didn't go well. I closed my journal and listened. What happened? He sighed heavily. Everything. The food came out cold. The roast was overcooked. The kids were cranky. Cynthia's family started arguing about politics again. And then his voice trailed off. Cynthia ended up in the kitchen crying. I could picture it. The fancy table, the forced smiles, the empty warmth. It wasn't hard to imagine the tension filling every corner of that perfect house. I'm sorry to hear that, I said softly. It just didn't feel like Christmas, he continued. Or New Year's. It didn't feel like anything. Something's missing, Mom. It feels like we built a house, but not a home. I let his words hang there for a moment. Maybe, I said finally, that's because you built a party, not a family. He didn't respond right away. I could hear him breathing, slow and heavy. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said after a while. Neither of us did. We just thought, well, I don't know what we thought, that we could handle things differently. But it didn't work. It all fell apart without you. Cynthia's voice came faintly from behind him, tearful but honest. Please tell her I'm sorry. I was wrong. Eddie handed her the phone. I could hear her sniffle before she spoke. Brittany, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but can we talk? Maybe start over. Her words caught me off guard. I had imagined many outcomes when I left that dinner, but this wasn't one of them. I appreciate that, Cynthia. I said carefully, but I think you and Eddie need some time to understand what went wrong, really understand it. This isn't just about dinner or holidays. It's about respect and space and family. I know, she whispered. We see that now. We were trying so hard to make everything perfect that we forgot who we were doing it for. There was truth in her voice, and for a brief second, I felt a pull in my heart. But I knew rushing back would only repeat the same pattern. Eddie came back on the line. Mom, come home, he said. We can fix this together. The kids miss you. It's not the same without you. I looked around the cabin, the fire glowing softly, the snow piling gently outside, the small Christmas ornament I'd bought at a local shop hanging on the mantel. Everything around me felt honest, simple, and real. I'm not ready to come home. Eddie, I said gently. Not yet. He sounded disappointed. Are you mad at us? No, I said. I'm not mad. I'm just finally taking the time I should have taken years ago. You and Cynthia need to figure out what family means for you, not what you think I want it to look like. But it's not the same, he said quietly. The kids kept asking if Grandma was coming for dinner. They even set an extra plate for you. That pulled at me. I had to take a slow breath before I spoke. Tell them Grandma loves them very much. I'll see them soon. But for now, I need to finish what I started. What's that? He asked. Learning how to live for myself, I said. He went quiet again. I could almost feel his thoughts moving, his guilt growing into understanding. Okay, he said finally. I guess we deserve that. You don't deserve punishment, Eddie, I said softly. But you do deserve growth. And that means sitting with what's uncomfortable. Cynthia's voice came faintly again in the background. Tell her we love her. Eddie repeated the words. We love you, Mom. I love you too, I said. Always will. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring into the fire. Part of me wanted to cry, but the tears never came. Instead, I felt a steady calm, like the kind you get when you finally stop fighting what's already true. Outside, fireworks began popping over the mountains. I walked out onto the porch, pulling my sweater tight around me. The bursts of color lit up the snow-covered peaks. And I thought about David's letter, about how he told me not to wait too long to live. He would have been proud of this moment. I raised my cup of tea like a toast to the night sky. Here's to letting go, I whispered, and to whatever comes next. The phone buzzed again later, a text from Eddie. Happy New Year, Mom. We're going to do things differently this year. I smiled and typed back, Happy New Year, Eddie. That's the best gift you could give me. Then I set the phone down and turned off the light. The fire burned low, warm and steady, like a quiet promise that I was right where I needed to be. And for the first time in many years, the new year didn't feel like something I had to endure. It felt like a beginning. By the time spring came, the snow around Aspen had melted into patches of bright green grass, and the air smelled like pine and wet earth. The mountains still wore traces of white at their peaks, but down in the valley, everything was waking up again. So was I. I had stayed longer than I planned. What was supposed to be a short winter trip turned into something more, a season of peace I didn't know I needed. I joined Silver Horizons twice a week. We didn't just ski anymore. We hiked, shared lunches, and sometimes just sat by the lake talking about life. That group became something special. Most of us were widows or women living alone. We laughed about how our grown kids still treated us like we needed permission to live, and we reminded each other that we didn't. By early April, I decided to host something small at my cabin, my own version of a family gathering. I called it the spring dinner. There was no fine china, no assigned seating, no performance. Just a long wooden table outside, simple food, wildflowers in glass jars, and a handful of women who had taught me that starting over wasn't selfish. It was survival. Paul helped me prepare. He arrived that morning with his sleeves rolled up, carrying bags of soil and seedlings. "I figured you'd want something to grow here," he said. "A garden makes any place feel like home." Together we planted tomatoes, herbs, and a few wildflowers. I hadn't gardened in years, not since David used to tease me for talking to the plants. When I pressed my hands into the dirt, something familiar returned, a quiet joy I'd almost forgotten. When the guests arrived, we cooked together in the small kitchen. Judy brought her famous chicken salad, Carol brought fresh bread, and I baked a lemon cake that reminded me of the ones my mother used to make on Sundays. As we sat outside eating, the conversation turned tender. Each of us shared something, a piece of ourselves we'd been too shy to talk about before. Carol talked about losing her husband suddenly, and how she still sets an extra cup of coffee out for him each morning. Judy shared how she'd spent years caring for everyone, but herself, until her health forced her to stop. Another woman, Nancy, said she'd spent 2 decades waiting for her grown sons to visit before realizing she needed to stop counting on promises that never came. We laughed, we cried a little, and we understood each other in ways that didn't need much explaining. When it was my turn, I told them about Christmas, about the text message, the dinner, and the night I decided to stand up for myself. Paul, sitting beside me, nodded quietly as I spoke. He didn't interrupt or offer advice. He just listened. When I finished, he said, "You didn't just stand up for yourself, Brittany. You stood up for every woman who's ever been told to stay quiet to keep the peace." That stayed with me. After dinner, when everyone had left, I sat outside watching the sky turn pink over the mountains. I felt grateful, not because everything had been easy, but because I was finally living honestly. A week later, as I was cleaning up the garden, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was addressed in careful handwriting I recognized instantly, Cynthia's. For a moment, I thought about not opening it. Part of me, worried it would reopen wounds I'd worked hard to close. But something told me to read it. The letter was simple but sincere. "Dear Brittany, I've wanted to write this for months. I'm sorry. I see now how unkind I was, not in words, but in how I made you feel invisible in your own family. I was trying to build our home, but I did it by pushing you out of it. I didn't realize how much you carried for all of us, and how selfish it was to take that for granted. We've started family counseling. Eddie and I are trying to do better, not just for us, but for the kids. They talk about you every week. Noah even said, Christmas wasn't Christmas without Grandma's pie. If you're open to it, I'd love to meet you for coffee when you're back in Denver. No expectations, just a talk. With love, Cynthia." I read it twice. It didn't sound like guilt or obligation. It sounded like growth. I folded the letter and placed it on the table beside my cup of tea. For a while, I just sat there, listening to the wind through the pines. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always come as one big moment. Sometimes it arrives slowly, letter by letter, word by word. The next morning, I wrote her back. "Dear Cynthia, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your honesty and your effort to make things right. I've learned that we all grow at different speeds, and that's okay. I'm not angry anymore. I just want us to move forward with kindness and respect. I'll be back in Denver soon. Let's meet for that coffee. Take care until then. Brittany." I sealed the envelope and walked it down to the small post office. The clerk, who now knew me by name, promised it would go out that afternoon. When I returned home, Paul was on the porch fixing the handle on the screen door. "You're up early," he said with a smile. I had a letter to send. I replied, "Good news." "Hopeful news," I said. "Sometimes that's even better." He nodded and handed me a trowel. "Ready to add more flowers?" We spent the rest of the day working side by side, not saying much. The garden was beginning to take shape, small green shoots breaking through the soil. Every time I looked at them, I thought about life and how it finds a way to grow even after the hardest winter. That evening, I sat by the fire with a cup of tea and thought about what lay ahead. Coffee with Cynthia, seeing my grandkids again, returning to Denver, but this time on my own terms. It didn't feel like going back. It felt like moving forward, carrying the lessons from these mountains with me. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the next chapter of my life wouldn't be about reclaiming the past. It would be about creating new traditions, ones that began not in the shadow of what I'd lost, but in the light of who I'd finally become. By the time December rolled around again, Denver felt different to me. I had moved into a smaller place not far from the Botanic Gardens. It was sunny, quiet, and easy to keep. I planted herbs on the balcony and kept one framed photo on the mantel, David holding baby Eddie in a blanket with candy cane stripes. I didn't try to rebuild the old life. I just lived the one I had now. A week before Christmas, Eddie called. His voice was steady. "Mom, we're keeping it simple this year. Just us, the kids, and a small meal at home. Will you come?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." When I pulled up on Christmas Day, the house looked the same from the outside, but inside everything felt warmer. There was no caterer, no perfect place cards. The tree was lopsided and covered with handmade ornaments. I spotted a crooked felt star with Maya stitched in big letters and a paper chain draped across the middle like a smile. Cynthia met me at the door in a soft sweater and an honest face. "Merry Christmas, Brittany." "Merry Christmas," I said. She took my coat and nodded toward the kitchen. "I made your sweet potato recipe," she said. "I followed your notes exactly. I hope I did it right." We walked in together. The table was smaller and set with the dishes I used to keep for everyday dinners, not company. A single candle, cloth napkins that didn't match. The ham was resting on a cutting board. I smelled cinnamon, clove, and orange peel. For the first time in a long time, it smelled like our family again. Noah ran in and wrapped his arms around me. "Grandma, you came." "I told you I would," I said, smoothing his hair. Maya held up a drawing. "I made this for you. It's our family at your new place." I looked at it, stick figures under a window full of plants. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. When we sat down, Eddie cleared his throat. He didn't tap a glass or ask for attention. He just looked at me. "Mom, would you say grace?" I searched his face. There was no performance, only a son asking his mother for something that mattered. I nodded. We bowed our heads. I didn't use the old words because the old life was gone. I used simple ones that fit the life we were in now. Thank you for the food on this table and the hands that made it. Thank you for the people sitting here and the second chances that brought us back to one another. Help us keep our hearts gentle and our words kind. Amen. No one rushed to talk after that. We sat in a quiet that felt good. Then Eddie wiped at his eyes and smiled. Amen. We passed dishes around. The sweet potatoes were just right, soft, a little brown at the edges. The ham carved easily. Cynthia watched my face after she took a bite of her own cooking, like a student waiting on a grade. I reached for her hand. "Delicious," I said. "Really?" She squeezed back. "Thank you for teaching me without making me feel small." We ate slowly and talked about regular things. School concerts, new shoes that were too tight, a neighbor's dog that kept digging under the fence. No one argued about money or politics. No one tried to impress anyone. We were just people who cared about each other sharing a meal. After dessert, my pie, baked that morning in my small oven, Eddie carried the plates to the sink and turned to me. He looked older than last year, but also lighter. "Mom," he said quietly, "thanks for reminding us what family means." I thought of that night in Boulder, how loud it was, how invisible I felt, how I tapped my glass and changed the direction of my life. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel proud either. I felt steady. Family isn't a room we perform in, I said. It's a place we show up as we are. He nodded. We're learning. Cynthia stepped beside him. And we're still in counseling, she said. It's helping. We listen more now. We don't try to win. I can tell, I said. The kids brought me a small box wrapped in tissue. Inside was a simple ornament, a wooden house with a tiny red door. On the back, in careful handwriting, it said, "Home is where we treat each other right." I looked up. Did you write this? Maya nodded. Daddy helped. I hung it on a branch near the middle of the tree. It tilted a little to the left and made the whole thing look more real. Later, when the dishes were drying and the kids were building a puzzle on the floor, I stepped onto the back porch with a cup of tea. The air had a clean bite, and the sky over the foothills was turning gold. Eddie joined me, hands in his pockets. "I thought you might never come back," he said. "I didn't come back," I answered. "I came forward." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand." We stood there side by side, without needing to fix anything. The house behind us hummed with the quiet sounds of family, soft voices, a chair moving, the click of puzzle pieces. When I left that evening, we didn't make big promises. We set a date for a simple Sunday lunch in 2 weeks. I hugged the kids, hugged Cynthia for real this time, and told Eddie, "I'm proud of you not for being perfect, but for being willing." Driving home, I passed my old neighborhood. A light was on in the front room of the house I once called mine. Through the window, I saw a new family, someone setting a tray on a coffee table, someone else carrying a baby in sleepy circles. I didn't feel loss. I felt gratitude that those walls were hearing laughter again. Back in my apartment, I placed the wooden ornament on a small stand beside the framed photo of David and Eddie. I brewed a cup of chamomile and sat at the table where I liked to write. My hands rested flat on the page before the words came. Maybe standing up that night wasn't about anger. Maybe it was about finally standing up for the woman I'd forgotten I was. I looked up, and in my mind I spoke to the women who might be listening, the ones who feed everyone first and eat last, the ones who fold their feelings away like extra napkins, the ones who keep hoping someone will notice their empty chair. If you were in my shoes, would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have stood up too? Before you go, if this story spoke to you, please like, share, and leave a comment. Tell me, what tradition would you reclaim or release to bring real peace back into your home? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of courage and second chances. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before on her Kindle story.